Hello class, welcome back, and this is your MuseScore specific tutorial on chord symbols, one of the most important topics we'll be discussing this term. So what I've done is I've created a grand staff here, and I've done that because we are going to be sort of exploding these chord symbols out into notation. It's a good way to get familiar with the sound of these chords, and also a good way to execute some voicing procedures. So let's get started. Look at your Gary Lindsay book, page 28, and the author has here for us 21 different chord symbols as they're commonly written. That is the best ways, generally speaking, to write these chord symbols. And I have a few caveats, one of which has to do with the symbol used for major chords. I like a capital M. Always use a capital M for your majors. And beware also the slashed 7, that sort of Euro 7 or German 7. We never want to use that unless we're writing for a polka band, because it actually means something totally different. So stay away from that slashed 7. Let me point out a couple of things here. If I go to the Format menu, we've got this Style sub-option. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to show you guys this dialog that comes up. We're going to go all the way down to chord symbols here. And there's some really important settings. So first of all, starting with the style, I'm going to go ahead for now and just set this to jazz, which is going to give us that sort of penned look to all of the chords as though they've been written by hand. There's a procedure in order to do what we call stacking of chords. All right, so when I say stacking of chords, you know, really it's the difference between, like, if I were to write like an A7, and then we usually use parentheses here, and we go in ascending order, so it's like sharp 9, flat 13. Okay, that would be considered an unstacked extension. A stacked extension would be, of course, you've got your bass there, A7, and then usually in parentheses, flat 13, so highest extension or tension from the top coming down, sharp 9. This is the more commonly used approach currently, and part of that is just that it's a space-saving measure. It takes a lot less time, a lot less space on the page to notate that way. So that's what we're going to be going for here when we get to our first chord that deals with those, which is a C7 sharp 9 flat 13. The other defaults look good here. You want to make sure that your interpretation is set to jazz and not literal, which is the default. The reason that literal is no good for us is that if we have any type of 13th chord, like the C13, for example, it's a C dominant with the 13th or 6th, okay, an A, is that if we leave this set to literal, the playback is going to include the 11th, which we would almost never want in that particular chord situation, because of the half-step sort of rub we would get between this note, the 3rd, and the 11th right there. Okay, that's that compound minor 2nd. So we generally, on that kind of a chord, you know, we would want to do something along these lines right here. So the C, E, B flat, D, and an A, you know, maybe we've got a G in there as well. But the point being, again, we don't want that 11. So that's why we need to set this to jazz. By default, voicing is set to automatic, which is fine. I think we get more useful voicings from drop 2. I tell you what, I'll leave this set to automatic right now, and then we'll show you the difference a little bit later on. Okay, so just those settings. All right, so I'm going to hit OK now. In here in the beginning, we just, you know, we're going to have a C major triad. Okay, which everyone knows. I'm just going to click on this whole rest, and then Command on a Mac or Control for PC, K for chord, and then I'm just going to type, you know, capital, and always use capital letters for the root, C. And then I'm going to space it, space, 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 space. We get the nice interpretation of the chord in MuseScore. Then we've got our C major 7. I'm just going down page 28 right now. So capital C, remember capital M, lowercase a, and the number 7. And now you can hear the 7 applied to that chord. And we're just going to go through here. Now, this is not an assignment for you. You do not need to go through and do what I'm doing right now. But part of this is I want you to get a sense of what these sound like. Now, the 6-9 is an interesting one. The 6-9 actually gives us no 7th. So it's sort of, you know, C, we've got an E, we've got a G, you know, maybe the 9 is put up here, and then maybe the 6th is the A. So that kind of a thing. Again, you know, these I'm using open voicings right now. So that's the C9. I'll jump back a second here to that C6. The C6, that's that sound. The C major 7, you know, C major triad plus the 7th there. Okay, look at Gary Lindsay's book under description, major triad with major 7th, and if I add the 9, then I've got my major 9. He says that the C6 9 is the same as that C6 plus the 9 is added. Sometimes, by the way, you'll see this indicated C6-9 like that. Okay, it's the same thing. All right, so continuing on, we've got our first dominant chord. So anytime you've got a letter, C in this case, followed immediately by number, it's a dominant chord. All right, so we've got that now. It's just, you know, okay, and maybe the program voiced it a different way, but those are the pitches that are involved there. So with the exception of like a C6 and some really rare ones like C5 and C2, which you'll hardly ever see, anytime you've got a root or letter followed immediately by a number, that means it's going to be a dominant type chord, or the 7th will be lowered. All right, then we've got our C9. Okay, you can hear the D in that voice. Now we've got C13, big C13. C7 sharp 11. I like to use parentheses. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, you can hear that very distinctive sound. It's related to the Lydian dominant chord scale, also the melodic minor mode, and you'll find more information on that toward the back of the Lindsay book around page 193. Then we've got our C7 with the flat 9. You know, and even if you don't use the parentheses, you'll still hear the playback of these voicings. So C7 flat 9, like so. Then we've got our C13 flat 9. I like to use parentheses just to be consistent, and also because when you have more than one chord extension at once, such as the next example, you're going to want to have those. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add them on to that chord right there. So now we need to do something a little bit different. There is a file that I'm going to make available to you MuseScore users, and it's something that you're going to have to install to your library directory in the documents. So just to sort of show you where that's at here, I go to Go, and on my Mac I go to Library. You can see the library selected here, and I've got my user folder here. It's in Documents, and then I go to MuseScore 3, and it's this chordstacked.xml. So by default, that does not appear in this MuseScore 3 folder. That's something I had to put there, and again, that's a template that I'm making available to you so that you can stack if you want to. Now, in order to make the stacking happen, you're going to have to do one more thing here, which is you're going to have to go to Format, Style, and then make sure that your custom radio box is checked, and you need to make sure that from the folder icon here that you are directing that to that chords stacked XML file. So I hit OK, I hit OK. What that allows me to do now is to enter the chord notation as stacked. Now, you know, MuseScore has some limitations. It's a free program, so it doesn't do this quite as elegantly or conveniently Sibelius, but I can basically use this XML file now by hitting, I've got Command K, just like before, so I've got my cursor now. And now I've got big C7. Now this is a little bit different, okay? I can't just use parentheses. I use my bracket key here, and then I type from the top down. So I type flat 13, and then slash sharp 9, and then close bracket there. And now when I hit spacebar, I've got that stacked, okay? Now, again, really important that you set that style to custom, directing it to that XML file, because otherwise you're just going to get something that looks really weird if you try entering that way. Okay, so continuing on now, I've just got my C minor, It's just a C minor triad. And I've got my C minor. Notice I'm using a small m for my minors now. That helps distinguish it again from a major, C minor 6. And then this is the C half diminished chord. So you'll see sometimes, you'll see this C and then the shortcut for half diminished is 0 on the keypad. You'll see that sometimes, but I prefer, and I am asking you to use the chord symbol for this, which is what Gary Lindsay has: C, small m, small I, 7, lowercase e, 5. Okay, there's our half diminished. Then we've got C and then the plus symbol. Okay, you will see that sometimes as this, C augmented, and certainly if you enter it that way, you'll hear the same thing, but we're going to use plus for our augmented in this class. Then we've got C plus 7. Okay, that's C dominant 7 with a raised fifth. Okay, I actually prefer C7 sharp 5. That's my preference for that notation. Then we've got our C lowercase o. That gives us diminished. Okay, and again, you know, you'll see this sometimes as C lowercase dim like that. Okay, but we're going to use the O. And then at the end here, we've got our C fully diminished 7. So C lowercase o 7. All right. So now we've got, you know, I could go through these and hear voicings for each one of these chords. And I mentioned voicings earlier. I want to show these in a few different ways. Let's just start by showing or displaying the C chord. So we're going to come in here and we're going to go to Tools, Realize Chord Symbol. Now for the purposes of blowing or exploding these chords up into notation, it might be a good idea for us to come back to Format, Style again and switch this interpretation back from jazz to literal. And that is because otherwise, as you can see here, if I put this on jazz, it's going to add a note that doesn't belong because of that chord symbol. Okay, it doesn't say C, you know, add to or anything like that. So that's not what we want. So in this case, I'm going to go back to Format, Style, and Interpretation, Literal. And now I'm going to select the measure, and we'll say Realize Chord Symbols. And it's just a C major triad. Now let's place this note down on the bottom. So you know what I might do is I might just cut that, and I might paste it down there at the bottom. So I just cut it to my clipboard and paste it at the bottom. You know, we can do a few of these at once. I'm just going to select a range of these, and I'm going to realize the chord symbols. All right, so you can see here that in the right hand or treble clef at least, that we've got closed position chords for each one of these, and you know it's added the root for us. So again, if we wanted to, you know, we could come in here and paste these bottom notes. So, all right, let's try something else here. So I mentioned the voicings earlier. So what we could do here is we could switch the voicing from automatic to, I think that drop 2 is a pretty useful setting. And we'll talk more about what drop 2 means later in the class when we talk about all of our voicing techniques, but I'm just going to switch this to drop 2 for now. And let's try this again. Let's go realize chord symbols like so. And so now what I've done by doing a drop 2 is I've opened up the voicing a little bit. Okay, this note, the G, is now parked an octave below that A. So it gives us a more open sound and really, you know, a voicing that would be commonly used. And again, if I wanted to, I could just do that. All right, so we can grab several of these at the same time. I will grab these 3 at the same time. Okay. So again, getting my camera back here. The C7, what it's done here for us is it's done, okay, with the C on the bottom. That's the C7. It's given us a C9, 5th, 9th, 3rd, flat 7. The C13, it's given us root, and it's given us our 13th in this octave. So it's actually omitted the 5, which is pretty common. Okay, all right, we'll continue on here. Let's grab these ones. right, so we got that crunchy dissonance just a second ago. Now the one catch here is, like in this chord voicing, for example, on that C7 13 flat 13 sharp 9, and remember that we're going to have that funkiness with the bracket unless we make sure that our custom is set to the chord stacked, so that resolves that. All right, so we've got our flat 13 on the bottom, and what I don't like about this voicing is the order of those two notes. You're hardly ever going to see that chord that way, okay? This note, the third, right, is usually going to appear on the bottom there, and the sharp 9 on top. The reason for that is, of course, we try to avoid this half-step interval. We've got our C7 sharp 11, C7 sharp 11, we've got our C7 flat 9, C, G, there's our flat 9, the D flat, third, flat 7, like that. The C13 flat 9, now we've got a 13, flat 9, third, and 7th, like so. Okay, we just talked about the flat 13, 9. These are all pretty simple. I'm just going to go ahead and select the entire range, realizing the chord symbols. Okay, so hopefully here, the takeaway for you is that if you wanted to be able to hear some of these chords and see what they look like in notation, and again, you could switch the voicings around so that you have a closed or drop 2, and there's a bunch of other options as well. So yeah, just a little introduction here to chord symbols in MuseScore.